I recently shared a review of the brand new Walther PDP. That's the Performance Duty Pistol. It's marketed as a duty or concealed carry handgun with an incredible trigger and an optics-ready slide for optimal performance. Many of its specs, and most notably its ergonomics, predictably raise the question, how does it compare with the PPQ? And that, my friends, is what this video is about. The PPQ has been a very popular handgun for several years, to say the least. It has inspired dozens of other pistols, and for many people it's set the benchmark for what a stock trigger in a striker-fired pistol should be. And that inspiration doesn't seem to stop outside the offices and development labs of Walther itself, as they continue to introduce variations on the design, such as the steel frame and Q5 options. But this new gun, the PDP, is a little bit different. This one seems to be more focused on the practical. Well, after all, duty is its middle name. Well, I told you all about the PDP in the first video review, so let's see how it compares against the PPQ. The PDP is virtually identical to the PPQ in many ways. At first glance, you might even wonder why there is a new model if they're so similar. But the more you look, the more differences you'll see. Let's take a look at some of those differences. The redesigned slide is visually distinct from the traditional arched shape of the Walther handgun. The new slide, the PDP, is squared off quite a bit with a much flatter top surface. However, it does lack the anti-glare serrations on the top of the PPQ. Front and rear slide serrations are cut deep and very wide, made for ultimate traction and in anticipation, I think, of a gloved hand. The PPQ's slide grabbers are a bit more elegant looking. The removable polymer slide plate reveals a pre-cut optic mount, ready for a red dot. Previously, only the Q4 tack in the PPQ family offered this functionality, but unlike the Q4 tack, the rear sight stays in place on the PDP, although the stock sights are too low to co-witness. The sights on the PDP are compatible with Glock Sites, I've told you that already, and more importantly, with the millions of aftermarket sights that are compatible with Glocks. The PPQ sights are relatively proprietary and not all that easy to change. The PDP offers more Picatinny rail space on the dust cover, which should accommodate a larger selection of accessories. On the inside, the components are almost completely identical as well, but there are a few subtle exceptions. The ejector on the new PDP is much larger and arguably stronger, while its basic shape and the contact area appear to be unchanged. The trigger spring has been modified, fitting in the same space and seemingly interchangeable, but the new spring has a greater number of coils and it looks like a smaller wire diameter. So I'm not an engineer and I might have this completely wrong, but I believe this should make the spring slightly lighter and possibly give it a longer life as well. All the other internals appear identical or at least interchangeable. The barrels are also identical within manufacturing tolerances, and the recoil spring and guide rods are also a dead match, except for the end cap color. In fact, you can swap the entire slide assemblies between these two models and they will be fully functional. Ask me how I know. On the back of the polymer grip frame, the new PDP has a small lip like a stubby beaver tail, where the PPQ does not. Also different on the identically shaped and different frames is the texture. The PPQ has that very nice looking pattern that I've always called paisley, but the PDP has the grip texture more like the Q5 steel frame models. An improvement, in my opinion. Also different between the frames is the lack of the sculptured finger groove area on the front strap. The new model has a nicely checkered but flat front strap in its place. And I may have already mentioned that the front of the trigger guard is fully checkered now. The PDP is roughly 1/2 ounce lighter on my scale. And that's not much difference, but it is a slight difference. Wow, see there? A lot more differences than you might have first thought, right? And I might have even missed a few things. But one of the most genius moves by Walther is what's not different. They didn't mess up the fantastic ergonomics. The trigger is still the same physical trigger with that same feel, and the magazines are compatible with PPQ magazines. This is huge for me. The one caveat though on the magazine compatibility, I have the 4-inch compact version of the PDP, and there's also a 4.5-inch full duty sized version that's taller and takes an 18-round capacity magazine. I doubt that the 15-round capacity magazines would fit in that gun. I always say that options and choices are a good thing. I don't think the differences between these guns are significant enough to say that one's better or even to favor one above the other objectively. But there are certainly differences that go more than skin deep, so it becomes a user preference choice. One question that I always try to answer whenever I'm doing a head-to-head comparison between two guns is, do I shoot one of them better than I shoot the other? Because at the end of the day, if I'm evaluating for me, that's what really counts. And if you're evaluating for you, that should be hopefully what really counts. So I'm tempted to say that in the case of the PPQ versus the new PDP, that because they are so similar and the grip frame is virtually identical, certainly the ergonomics, that no, I'm not going to shoot one better than the other. But you know, as John Madden used to say, that's why they play the game, right? You never know. I might shoot one better than the other. The sights are a little different. The triggers are supposed to be slightly different, although they feel very much the same. And even though it's a chilly day, I've taken off the gloves. I want to make sure I'm feeling the trigger really well as I shoot, so that I can provide any feedback about how each trigger feels while shooting. But enough yakking. And that nice target that I'm shooting at is 13 yards away. All right, there was 10 rounds from the PPQ. Now let's try 10 rounds from the new PDP. So without gloves, it is nice to feel this texture. Now I have a rubber Talon grip on the PPQ that I've had on there for a really long time. I'm not going to take that off just to make this a more even playing field. Sorry, I'm not that fair of a person. So the one thing, as I was shooting the PPQ, the one thing that I noticed right away is those standard PPQ sights, that 3-dot sight. And one of the things that I never was a big fan of was how wide the rear notch is on the rear sight. You have a lot of play in your airspace in the front. And I personally struggle with that because If I over concentrate, you know, the front sight is doing this on me too much within that notch. So I prefer them to be a little bit tighter. This PDP does have a much tighter 3-dot sight picture. All right, and there's those 10 rounds. It looks like they are very consistently to the right, if I'm seeing that correctly from back here. Interesting, although it doesn't look like a terrible group. Trigger on, of course, the PPQ is legendary. We know all about that trigger. The trigger on this PDP is at least as good. At least as good. I'm having a hard time distinguishing between the two with just how it feels. So it is, for all intents and purposes, from me, shooting them both back to back, you know, one after the other, identical. Okay, so it looks like according to these two groups, both guns performed pretty much the same, at least in my hands on this particular day. The PPQ's group of 10 rounds measured at 2.8 inches total, and the PDP's group 2.96 inches. It's about 1/10 of an inch. That's not very much difference between two groups. I will say that I think the PDP gave me a little tighter concentration with fewer flyers, whereas the PPQ was a little more spread out. But in all fairness, that could be just that I settled down and started shooting a little better when I shot the second group. So there's too many variables when you do this kind of a test for it to mean a whole lot. But for whatever it does mean, there it is. So when you have two contenders that want to battle it out, where do you put them? On the canvas, of course. So here we are head to head with the brand new Walther PDP and the perennial favorite Walther PPQ. So one of the things that I know I'm curious about, and I presume you are too, is what is the trigger pull for both of these guns? So let's find out. So I have shot them side by side and head to head, and the triggers feel virtually identical to me. They are essentially, mechanically, the same trigger. I have not yet measured them, so this will be a first. Let's start with the PPQ. And at this particular moment in time, 4 pounds, 14.5 ounces. So just a little bit under 5 pounds. And that is the trigger that we all know and love. And now the PDP, the new Challenger. Ooh, look at that. 4 pounds, 8 ounces even, exactly 4.5 pounds. So there you go, kids. Not an exhaustive test by any means. I just did one pull each. Usually I will do 3 to 5 and I'll take an average, but one pull each. All right, so we definitely have a slight edge on the trigger gauge with the new PDP. The folks at Walther told me that they thought the trigger might be better on this new gun even than the PDQ, and I can't argue with them. And now, as is my custom, I play for you the song of my people. Here's the trigger that we're all used to on the PPQ. It is a polymer trigger. It has that center safety blade. It is a serrated trigger face. When we collapse that blade, you can see that there. And there is its profile. So that's the one that we're used to. And now if we switch up and look at the PDP, it is virtually an identical trigger. It just has PDT carved into it. I believe that's on both sides, and that means, I'm going to take a wild guess, performance duty trigger. And it also has a serrated trigger face. Now one thing you may notice right here, we have like a true checkering molded into the front of the trigger guard, and here on the PPQ it's just a horizontal serration. So that is definitely an upgrade for those of you who shoot wrong and like to put your finger there. You'll might like this one better. Hard to say. So here's just a little bit of a close-up look at the two pairs of sights. PDP is on the left, PPQ on the right. And the PPQ, like I said, when I was shooting the gun, it reminded me that this really wide notch in the rear sight was something that I was not a fan of with the PPQ, which is why on my 5-inch PPQ that I shot in competition for years, I changed that sight. I changed the front sight as well, but I put new sights on that gun. And speaking of which, with the PDP now, a couple things. Number one, much tighter 3-dot sight picture, so you have less notch, so there's less room for that front sight to wander around, which I like personally. Number two, it is adjustable. You see these two little screws for adjustment. So we have windage and elevation adjusting capabilities, and as I've already previously announced in my full review, the big news is that this rear sight is Glock compatible. So you can buy any sight that would be for the Glock dovetail, and it should drift right in there. And of course the front sight has kind of always been that same design. It's got a screw that's screw that comes up from underneath and holds it in place just like Glock. So those have always been the same type, but they are Glock compatible. Should you find yourself faced with this choice, I hope I've helped to provide you with some meaningful information, maybe some thoughtful comparison, and hopefully some light entertainment. If I have, then I've done my job. The next project with the PDP is probably going to be me putting some Glock compatible sights on it that will co-witness with an optic. If you click the subscribe button and turn on notifications, you'll see that as soon as it comes out. Thanks to everyone who supports this channel. Thanks to my fantastic Patreon patrons. And thanks to you for watching. Smush that like button on your way out, and I'll see you again soon.